Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 12 Principles for Turning Customers and Employees into Lifelong Fans with Jon Picoult. My name is Colin Mahan, and I'm a program manager at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit dedicated to enabling entrepreneurs from all over the world to realize their maximum potentials and grow. As you may have just seen in the chat, the NASDAQ Center, along with our partner Mentor Cloud, launched a free mentor matching platform for entrepreneurs called Mentor Makers. You can create your own advisory board to guide and inspire you with in-the-moment mentorship from topic experts and professionals dedicated to providing exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So you can find or become a mentor today by using the link in the chat. As we know, mentorship matters to all entrepreneurs. Their success is dependent on it. Now, none of what we do here at the center could be possible without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, and BPM. We're grateful and humbled by their contributions. Quick housekeeping, we're going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event, so please submit your questions for us in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen throughout the presentation. During these still unique times, we're curious on how sentiment is among the entrepreneurs we work with. So we're going to start by letting us know how you're feeling about your business right now. Are you optimistic? Are you just surviving? Are you anxious? Are you fearful? Let us know by participating in this poll. We hope that the end of the year is looking a little bit more optimistic, but understand that there are some cautiously optimistic sentiments out there. So I'm going to end this poll and share those results. Looks like optimism's on the rise, but totally understand that there's some anxiety and just survival mode out there. Hopefully our talk today will help with those sentiments. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest. To put it simply, he helps companies impress their customers. Jon Picoult is the founder of Watermark Consulting and a leading expert in customer employee experience. From Fortune 1000 CEOs to budding entrepreneurs, Jon has advised business people worldwide on how to cultivate loyalty in both the marketplace and the workplace. Today, Jon joins us to provide a glimpse into the loyalty-enhancing strategies described in his brand new book, From Impressed to Obsessed, the 12 Principles for Turning Customers and Employees into Lifelong Fans. Welcome, Jon.
Hello.
Happy to have you.
Here I am.
There you are. All
right.
Over to you. Still looking
Colin,
forward to
thanks
this.
for that intro. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here with you all. I want to thank the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center for inviting me to speak today. Excited to share this topic with all of you. As Colin said, I've adapted this program based on my new book, which focuses on customer experience. And I'm going to jump right into it because I got a lot I want to share with you over the next 35 to 40 minutes. And you know, the reason I'm passionate about customer experience is because if you think about it, many forms of competitive differentiation are fleeting these days. New products and new technologies can get from one company to another relatively easily. Cost leadership is difficult to achieve, let alone sustain. But a great customer experience and the internal ecosystem that supports it can actually accord tremendous strategic and economic advantage to a firm in a way that's difficult for competitors to replicate. So that's going to be our focus today, customer experience. And over the course of my time with you, we're going to cover three things. First, what is this thing called customer experience? Second, why does it even matter from a business standpoint? And then third, most importantly, how can you create a great one that's going to turn more of your customers into raving fans for you and your organization? But let's begin with that first point. Just what is this thing called customer experience? Because it means different things to different people. Well, you know, whatever it is, these are all companies that know how to do it well. These are all firms that are renowned for the quality of the customer experience they provide and the ensuing loyalty that it engenders. And you can't help but ask yourself, how do they do it so consistently day in and day out? And my answer to that question is simply this: the experience that these companies deliver to their customers does not happen by accident. It's very deliberate, very intentional. And I would submit that it really is the consequence of them all dipping into the same time-tested set of principles for shaping their interactions with customers. And as I said, I'm going to pull the curtain back in just a moment and share some of those principles with you. But the other thing that I would say all these companies have in common is they have a shared appreciation around just what the customer experience is and what it takes to actively manage it. And as I said, that's where I want to begin, because many people think the term customer experience is actually synonymous with customer service. And I would argue that nothing could be further from the truth. And to illustrate that point, I actually want to tell you a story about something called rap rage. Now, if you've never heard this term rap rage, I want to give you the definition from Jeff Bezos, the founder and former CEO of Amazon.com. He once said that, quote, rap rage is the frustration we humans feel when trying to free a product from a nearly impenetrable package. This is a trigger of rap rage. They're called clamshell or oyster shell packages. Very often, kids' toys, electronics, LED light bulbs come in this packaging. And all of you as consumers know that once you start ripping open this packaging, the edges are razor sharp. What you might not know, however, is that in the United States alone, each year, over 6,000 people end up in the emergency room with injuries inflicted from rap rage. They're trying so hard to extricate the product from this ridiculous packaging that they lacerate their bodies so badly they need to immediately seek out an ER physician. Now, scores more suffer minor scrapes and puncture wounds, like this poor soul. You might be familiar with one of those injuries. And then, of course, we can't forget about the masses of children who experience psychological and emotional trauma as they try to wait patiently while their mom or dad is opening up their Christmas gift or their birthday present, all the while witnessing their parents mutilate their bodies in the course of doing so. So rap rage is a widespread, if not acute, healthcare issue. But the reason that I lead off a program about customer experience talking about rap rage is because Amazon.com's response to the phenomenon of rap rage is a great example of a company truly appreciating what the customer experience is and how to actively manage it. And here's how the story goes. Back in the early 2000s, Amazon started to get feedback from customers. And it was feedback
John,
along the lines of, gee, you know, it's effortless.
John, sorry to interrupt. So speaking of customer experience, it looks like there's a little transcription box over your slides. Can you click the little X on it?
Sure.
Just the X out of that one. There you go.
You got it?
Oh, it's still up. Perfect.
There we go.
All right. Over to you. You're doing great. Thanks.
Thanks for letting me know. All right. It's all live, folks. It's all live, clearly. And so they started to get feedback from customers saying, hey, it was really easy to order from your website, but boy, it was a bear to open up the package that you sent me. Well, they even started getting photos and notes from people. This is an actual photo on screen from a customer of Amazon that sent to the company with a note that said, these are all the tools that I have to use in order to open up the packages that you send me. Well, in 2008, Jeff Bezos and his management team hatched their response to the phenomenon of rap rage. And it was called frustration-free packaging. And basically what it meant is that wherever possible, Amazon negotiated with their suppliers to take the products out of the metal twist ties, out of the clamshell package, give it to Amazon so they could just put it in their box, ship it to you, you get it, you take it out, you use it, you give it to your kids. There's no crying or tears, no blood or lacerations. Everybody's a lot happier. And this has actually become something of a competitive advantage for Amazon because brick and mortar stores, they can't replicate it because they use the clamshell as an anti-shoplifting device. Moreover, it's become yet another compelling proof point for the Amazon brand in terms of how easy it is to do business with them. But here's what I want you to take away from this story. It's Amazon's appreciation for the wide spectrum of touch points and interactions that comprise their customer experience. They recognize that even if subconsciously, people's perceptions of Amazon would in part be influenced by how easy or difficult it was for them to open up the package that they got. And so Amazon managed that final touch point as deliberately and intentionally as any other in their life cycle. And the irony is that many people would argue it is a touch point that is outside of Amazon's wheelhouse. Many would say, hey, once Amazon ships it from their warehouse, that's it, they're done. But Amazon doesn't see it that way, nor should you. As you go back to work, I would encourage you to think very broadly about the wide spectrum of touch points and interactions that comprise your customer experience, because I would submit to you that it probably begins far earlier than you anticipate, and it actually persists longer than you would imagine. Heck, you hope you never have a customer that defects from your business, but if they do, I would argue that point of defection deserves to be managed as deliberately and intentionally as any other touch point within your customer lifecycle. So here is Bezos' definition of customer experience. He notes it is bigger than customer service in that it is the full end-to-end experience. It starts when you first hear about Amazon from a friend and ends not when you get the package in the mail, but when you get it and open it. So you can see customer experience is very broadly defined and encompasses every live, print, and digital interaction point from pre-sale to post-sale that occurs within your business. All right, so now that we have a bit of a level set around just what this thing called customer experience is, let's talk about why it matters, why you as an entrepreneur should focus on it. And to address that, we really need to ask ourselves the question, well, what is so special about great customer experiences from a business perspective? And the answer, quite simply, is that it hits your income statement in two places, just the right places. On the one hand, it hits your revenue line by helping to lift revenues. And I'll give you some examples why. When you have happy, loyal customers, they stick around longer. You retain them longer. When you retain them longer, you derive greater revenue from them, right? Simple. In addition, though, happy, loyal customers tend to entertain ideas for other products and services from you. So you derive new revenue streams from that. You also find that happy, loyal customers tend to be less price sensitive, so you can derive greater revenue from each purchase that they make. And then, of course, because these happy, loyal customers love you so much, they refer their friends, family, and colleagues to you. And so you derive entirely new revenue streams from all of those folks. Those are just among the few reasons why you see revenues go up with a great customer experience that inspires loyalty. But that is only half the story, because the other thing that you see with a great customer experience is it actually helps you to control, if not reduce, your operating expenses. And I'll give you a few examples why. Because you've got getting so many referrals from your current happy, loyal customers, you can actually spend less on new business acquisition, on marketing, on promotions, on advertising. That helps to reduce expenses. Second, you find that happy, loyal customers tend to complain less. And when they complain less, it actually it puts less stress on your operating infrastructure. And you've seen this when complaints come into your business, everyone circles around it to divine what went wrong, how to make the customer whole. That takes time and energy. It costs money. You have fewer complaints. It means you're delivering a better experience at a lower cost. And then lastly, you find that happy, loyal customers, because they've been around so long with you, they tend to become familiar with your products, your services, your way of doing business. And as a result, they require less hand-holding than entirely new customers. So when you have a large cadre of happy, lifelong customers, you end up doing less hand-holding. It reduces the stress on your operating infrastructure. And again, you deliver the experience at a more competitive cost. So this is why a great customer experience is so good from a business standpoint. Now, you might look at this and say, well, gee, that sounds good. But you might challenge me and say, John, does this really happen in the marketplace? That a great customer experience helps cultivate loyalty, that raises revenues, controls or reduces expenses, and juices profitability as a result? Does that really happen out there? And my answer to you is an emphatic yes. And I'm going to prove it to you right now. Because the headline here, folks, is it pays to take stock in customer experience. One of the things that my company does is every few years, we look at the shareholder returns of companies that lead in customer experience versus those that lag. And mind you, we're not picking the companies, so it's not like we're stacking the deck. We use third-party research surveys of consumers, like over 10,000 consumers each year, surveyed about these companies, and they rank these organizations about 300 plus in terms of their customer experience. So there's actually a new version of this study that's in my book, but this is the most recent publicly available one. And it has 11 years of data ending in 2017. And so if you had held a portfolio each of those years of the top 10 publicly traded companies in customer experience, you would have seen about 180% return on your money. Compare that to what would have happened if you had just invested in the S&P 500 index. You can see that the leaders outperformed the index by 50 percentage points. Now the story gets even more compelling when you look at what would have happened if you had invested in the bottom 10 in customer experience, the CX laggards. You can see they underperform the market index and far underperform the leaders. As a matter of fact, the leaders outperform the laggards by a striking 3-to-1 ratio. Now, folks, this is not 1 year of performance or even 3 or 5. This is over a decade that this pattern, this pecking order of performance has persisted. And in my view, this is the exclamation point on the case for customer experience, because these companies in green are enjoying all the benefits of that loyalty lift. Higher revenues, better controlled expenses, and juiced profitability as a result. And the companies in red, their performance is being anchored by just the opposite: depressed revenues, higher operating expenses. And I realize that many of you in the audience don't lead public companies. You lead private enterprises. But I would tell you, I think that the lesson here is just as meaningful to you, because what this data is really showing is that the marketplace believes that companies that deliver a great customer experience over the long term are simply more valuable than those that do not. And that's relevant whether you are a public or a private entity. All right, so of course, the key question then, folks, is how do you get into the green bar on this graph? And I've spent the better part of my career trying to figure that out, and that is the focus of my new book, is really understanding what these companies in the green bar are doing to achieve that level of outperformance. And that brings us to the final topic that I wanted to cover today, which is what can you do to create a great customer experience that's going to get you in that green bar and turn your customers into raving fans for you and your organization? So if I had to answer that question, how to do this in one sentence, if you just had to remember one thing, it would be this: don't satisfy your customers. If you are aspiring to satisfy your customers, then you are aspiring to mediocrity. And the reason I say that is because study after study has shown that satisfied customers defect all the time. If you're trying to derive competitive advantage, strategic advantage, economic advantage from the customer experience you deliver, it is not enough to merely satisfy customers. You must impress them. You must leave that indelible impression in their mind that's going to cultivate the referral and repurchase behavior that's really the lifeblood of any business. So if we dive a little deeper into that, so how, John, then do you go about impressing customers? And that's where I want to reveal these 12 principles that are the centerpiece of my new book. Basically, I said up front, when I had that slide up of those legendary companies, I said they're really all dipping into the same time-tested principles for shaping interactions with customers. Well, in my study of the companies that do this well, I've basically distilled their techniques into these dozen principles which can be applied to any type of business and any type of customer, be it internal or external, B2B, B2C, whatnot. Now, of course, in my time today, I don't have time to go through all 12 principles with you. I want you to know that after today's session, the NASDAQ Center is going to send you an email that will have some takeaway material where you actually get from me a brief synopsis of each principle, even the ones that I don't cover today. But in my time today, I actually want to cover two that I think will give you a good flavor of what these principles are all about and some specific ideas on how you could immediately use them to elevate the quality of the experience that your business is delivering. So let's actually start from the very beginning with the first principle, which is called creating peaks and avoiding valleys. So this principle is actually grounded in cognitive science, as many of the 12 are. And the reason that's the case is because of this. I would submit to you that how people remember their experience with your company is arguably more important than the experience itself. And here's why I say that. Imagine if one of your existing customers were approached by a friend or a colleague, and they said to your customer, hey, I remember you telling me you work with company X or you've used product Y. I'm in the market for something like that. What do you think of company X? The next thing that's going to come out of your customer's mouth is not going to be based on the experience they had with your company. It's going to be based on what they remember about that experience. And the way our brains are wired, those two things can actually be quite different. And that's where the cognitive science of customer experience comes into play, which is a primary focus of my new book. And it relates to this particular principle about creating peaks and avoiding valleys, because this is about how we remember our experiences. And the fact is that we don't remember our experiences like a continuous movie, like a streaming video. It's not like we remember every frame in the movie, and then there's some algorithm in our head that sort of calculates the percentage of pleasantness versus unpleasantness in the experience and comes up with some number to determine whether or not we're satisfied. That's not how it works. Instead of remembering things as a continuous movie, we actually remember things as a series of snapshots. And it's not just any snapshot that we remember. What we actually remember are the peaks in the experience, the high points, and the valleys, the low points. Those are the two things. Everything else just kind of melts away from our recollection. And this has very important ramifications for how you go about engineering your customer experience, which I'm going to illustrate with this first example. So what you're seeing here is something called a customer journey map. This is a very rudimentary version. And basically, journey maps are meant to kind of chart out visually how the typical customer is feeling at a particular business at various points during the experience. So the example that I've got for you here is one that I'm sure you've all experienced yourselves. You make an appointment at a new doctor that you've never visited. We're going to call it the new patient customer experience. And so the way you read this chart is at the top in the columns from left to right are sort of this sequentially the episodes that you go through in this experience, from making an appointment for the new doctor to the day of the appointment, checking in, then filling out new patient paperwork, waiting in the waiting room, getting examined by the doctor, and then ultimately checking out at the front desk, paying and leaving. And on the left-hand axis, you can see the scale from 1 to 5, which indicates how does the typical customer, how are they feeling at each of those interaction points. So you can see for this doctor's office that I've charted, things start off kind of neutral when you make the appointment, but then I don't know what they're doing, but it's something amazing at check-in because people's impressions are just off the charts positive. Maybe they've got super, super friendly representatives at the front desk. I don't know, but it goes downhill from there. And it actually takes a dive and it hits it bottoms out in the waiting room where things are pretty awful. Again, don't know what's going on there. Maybe the waiting room smells bad. Maybe there's no good reading material or good Wi-Fi. Maybe it's just a really long wait. Then things pop up a little bit and the whole experience ends a little bit south of neutral at the point of checkout. So here's what you need to know about this experience. The patients that go through these interactions are really only going to come away remembering two things. They're going to remember the peak at check-in, and they're going to remember the valley in the waiting room. Everything else is going to kind of melt, evaporate from their recollection. And so one important ramification here is in your business, you actually don't need to nail every single customer touch point. You could actually be deliberate in choosing certain touch points that are maybe are less important to your customers. And you could say, you know what, I'm just going to be average on this, maybe even a little below average, because obviously you have to invest wisely. You can't make everything perfect. But what this tells you is you can do that and still actually be okay and leave a great impression on people, provided there are more and higher peaks than there are deep valleys, because those are the snapshots that people are going to carry with them. And if you've got more peaks, that's going to elevate their recollection, their perception of the experience, so that when they're asked about you or when they think about repurchasing, that's what they're going to rely on. So how do you then create more and higher peaks and fewer and less deep valleys? And you're probably like, well, duh, John, you do more things well and less things poorly. And that is true. However, there's another way to skin the cat here. And I want to show you what those ways are. One way to skin the cat here to create more peaks is to actually spread the pleasure. To take an existing peak in your experience, something that you know your customers already love, and figure out how can I turn that one peak into two or maybe more? Because each of those peaks then becomes that snapshot that's going to elevate people's brands and brand impressions. So let me show you how this stuff is done with an example of Southwest Airlines. Southwest, if you've been in touch with the news lately, they're actually creating quite a few valleys for their customers. They canceled a lot of flights over the last week, but over the long term, Southwest is perennially rated among the best companies in customer experience, not just in the airline industry, but in any industry. So the example I have here for you is, this is a real email that I got from Southwest. About 10 years ago, Southwest inked a deal with the Dish Network to offer live streaming TV on their flights. And a decade ago, this was very unusual. Today, it's not quite as unusual, but still, not every airline has this. And the thing is, though, for many years, what Southwest did is the night before your flight, it sent out this email. And you can see the subject line says, your Southwest flight tomorrow, watch TV for free. Now, the way that this Dish Network streaming TV worked was you didn't have to download an app in advance. All you had to do was open up your browser, hook up to the onboard Wi-Fi, and you start streaming. So you got to ask yourself, why did Southwest go through all the trouble of sending this email out the night before to every passenger before their flight? And here's why. What they were trying to do was to create a second peak from something that they knew was already very well received by their customers. Because when you get this email the night before, especially if you've never flown Southwest before, it actually creates an air of anticipation. And that creates a peak in the experience, an anticipatory peak, where you're like, wow, I get to watch live streaming TV on my flight cross country tomorrow on Southwest. That is so cool. I don't get to do that on any other airline. And so it creates one of those peaks. The next day you go on board, you fire up your browser and hook into the Wi-Fi, and there you are leaning back, watching your favorite programs. That creates another peak because you're there using the service. So in essence, Southwest has taken one thing that they knew customers really liked about their onboard experience, And they used communications to create this peak of anticipation that creates a second snapshot for people that elevates their perceptions. Now, if you want to spread the pleasure to create more peaks, what do you think you want to do with the pain in your customer experience? If you can't make the pain go away, then you want to compress it. And here's an example of that. Imagine 800-line call centers and putting somebody on hold. Here's how I would describe this aspect of the principle. It is better to put someone on hold once for 6 minutes than twice for 3 minutes. Same overall hold time, right? But the thing is, when you put somebody on hold twice for 3 minutes, you are creating two valleys that pull down their impression of the whole experience. If you do it just once for 6 minutes, granted, it's an ugly valley, but it is only one negative snapshot that they're going to carry with them. So in addition to spreading the pleasure, you want to think about how do you lump all the annoyances or frustration in the experience, in essence, aggregate them into one ugly valley, or at least fewer valleys, because that's going to reduce the number of snapshots people are carrying away with them, negative snapshots. All right, one more thing I want to share with you on this first principle, and that's something I call the tentpole effect. Here's why I call it the tentpole effect. Imagine that you are holding the main tentpole, the center tentpole in a circus tent. When you lift that tentpole higher and higher, what happens to the rest of the surface of the circus tent? It rises. It's like a tide that lifts all boats. That's actually how our memories work. If there is something really extraordinary in part of the experience for us, call it the tentpole peak, we actually end up recollecting the rest of the experience as being better, even though you might not invest any time as a business in improving those other interaction points. It's actually kind of freaky. It's almost magical. And let me give you an example, a real world example, so you can see how this works. It comes from a company called Canstar Blue, which is like the Consumer Reports of Australia. And they did a study some years ago on cellular service providers in Australia. And you can see that they rated these providers across a number of attributes in the columns here: price, service, accessibility, billing, network coverage. Highest rating was 5 stars, lowest rating 1 star. And this is based on consumer feedback, okay? Now, you can see on the left-hand side, there are 5 carriers, wireless service carriers that they evaluated. I actually want to focus your attention on 2, Optus and Virgin Mobile. Now, Virgin Mobile, of course, is part of the Virgin Group, Richard Branson's company, and he loves customer experience. You know, his MO, his strategy is he waits for an industry to knock the customer experience bar so far down that he then can swoop in with a much better offering and laugh all the way to the bank. And he has done it time and time again. And he did it here in Australia with wireless service. So you can see that Canstar Blue, when they compared Virgin Mobile and Optus on price, they gave Virgin Mobile top rating, 5 stars to just 4 for Optus. On service, again, 5 to 4 in favor of Virgin. On accessibility, 5 to 4. On billing, 5 to 4 again in favor of Virgin. So Virgin's actually creating a few tent poles, a few high peaks. But then we get to network coverage. Network coverage, consumers said Virgin Mobile, top network coverage, 5 stars, highest rating. Optus customers gave Optus just 3 stars. Here's the interesting wrinkle. At this time in Australia, Optus and Virgin Mobile shared the exact same cellular network. When Virgin entered the market, they didn't have a cellular network. They didn't own it, and they didn't want to build one, so they rented theirs from Optus. So the 2 carriers had exactly the same network coverage, exactly the same network quality, yet consumers thought that Virgin Mobile's network was great, and they thought that Optus's was just kind of meh. And this is an example of the tentpole effect, because Virgin was creating such high peaks with other aspects of its experience that it automatically made people feel better about the network coverage that apparently wasn't so great according to the Optus customers. So that's how the tentpole effect works. All right, so to recap for you, how can you capitalize on this first principle? 1, think in your own business of opportunities to spread the pleasure. Ways that you could do it would be like Southwest, by creating an air of anticipation with things that you know your customer values and appreciates and enjoys. Or you could do it on the back end, sort of the reverse side, and create what I call an echo of a peak, where you remind people after the experience of the value that they derived from your product or service, the enjoyment that they got, maybe through like a year-end stewardship report, for example. So think about spreading the pleasure. Second, think about compressing the pain. And one way that you can do it is by lumping what I call lumping homework together. Whenever you give your customers homework, maybe they need to fill out forms or they have to gather information for you, anything that is not fun for them, think about how you can aggregate those asks into one big, hairy, ugly, audacious valley touch point. Instead of going back to the well numerous times and saying, fill this out for us, now give us this information, and then fill this form out. You don't want to create those multiple valleys for them to remember. And then lastly, in your business, make sure that you create a tentpole. Think of just at least one thing that you will be absolutely superior on relative to anyone else. It could be the way you onboard new customers. It could be your responsiveness to them. Whatever it is, just choose one thing. Because if you create that tentpole, then people are automatically going to feel better about the rest of the experience you're delivering, even if you don't invest anything in improving those other parts of the experience. All right, very good. So now I want to get to the second principle that I'm going to share with you. And this one is about giving customers the perception of control. This one, again, is grounded in cognitive science, and it's grounded in the idea that we as human beings like to be in control of things. We like to be in control of our surroundings. And when we're not, we tend to feel uncomfortable with the experience that we're going through. The problem is, what we like is what's called direct behavioral control. That's our hands on the steering wheel. But the problem is that in many businesses, you can't give your customer direct behavioral control. If I have to have an operation, I can't do it on myself. I have to delegate that to a surgeon. If I want to get a life insurance policy, I can't underwrite it myself. I have to delegate that to an underwriter. There are so many businesses where customers can't have direct behavioral control, and they have to rely on others and delegate to others. The risk is, though, the minute you do that in your business model, your customer is likely going to feel worse about the experience because they'll feel like they've lost some control. But here's the silver lining. There's been a lot of research around this, and what's been discovered is that there's a pretty good proxy for giving customers direct behavioral control. And it's actually about giving them the sense, the perception they have control. And if they feel that perception, it actually is as if they have direct behavioral control and they feel better about the experience. So let me show you how this works with an example of a psychology study featured in the book that was done with the American Red Cross. It was done at their blood donation centers. And the psychologist that was doing the experiment, the first experiment he did is he had a control group where when people sat down to give blood, the phlebotomist just took the blood from their non-dominant arm. But then with the experimental group, they actually had the phlebotomist ask the blood donor, which arm would you like me to take the blood from? Well, after all the blood was donated, they interviewed these people, and the folks who had the choice of arm reported feeling less pain in the procedure and having a better experience overall. And the amazing thing is, the only difference between the two groups is that latter group, they just asked, well, do you want right arm or left arm? And you could argue that is really an insignificant, meaningless decision. I mean, whether it's left or right arm, it is still a stranger coming at you with a sharp object. But what they did is they gave the donors there the perception of control, because one way of giving the perception of control is to give your customer the power of choice, however small or insignificant or subtle it might be. When I can choose right arm or left arm, it actually gives me the sense that I have control over the experience. In essence, what you're letting me do is conform the experience to my thoughts. I'm thinking, I want this in my left arm, and you give me the opportunity to do that. So I feel better. I feel like more control. But then there was a second experiment that the researchers did. And in this case, nobody got to choose what arm they wanted. It was always the non-dominant arm. But with the experimental group, they had them sit down before the donation procedure, and they had them listen to a 2-minute video that described in detail exactly what would happen in the course of the donation and what psychological and physiological feelings that the donor would likely experience as they donated the blood. Well, here again, they interviewed people after the donation. And again, the people who had seen the 2-minute video, okay, they couldn't choose what arm, but they saw the 2-minute video, they reported feeling less pain and a better experience giving blood. So what's going on there? Well, instead of conforming the experience to their thoughts by allowing them to choose the arm, what's done there is you're conforming their thoughts to the experience because you're setting an expectation. You're telling them in that 2-minute video exactly what to expect. And when you set expectations, you remove ambiguity from your customer's life. And when you remove ambiguity, what you are in essence doing is creating the perception of control. because there's nothing worse than having no idea what's coming next to sap you of a sense of control. So just merely by setting an expectation, you can accomplish that. Now, let me translate this into a business context, and you can see how this works in the real world. The example I'm going to use is from Disney World. They're great at using all 12 of the principles, especially this one. And this one comes from the world of line queuing. There are people that spend their entire lives studying the science of line queuing. Not a profession I would choose for myself, but the fact of the matter is they've come up with some really interesting findings, one of which supports this principle quite well. It's something that's been replicated in study after study. And they do it at Space Mountain, this picture, in Disney World, as well as every Disney attraction. And here's how it goes. Imagine you have two lines, line A and line B. And you have a person that gets into line A and a person that gets into line B at exactly the same moment. But the person in line A, when they get in the line, you look at them and you say to them, the approximate wait time from where you're standing is 5 minutes. The person in line B, when they get in the line, you don't look at them, you don't say anything. Study after study has shown with this scenario, when the two people get to the front of their respective lines at exactly the same time, if you ask the person in line A to estimate how long they waited, they will tend to estimate it as being less than the person in line B, even though they waited exactly the same amount. If you ask the person in line A to rate the experience of waiting in line, they will tend to rate it more highly than the person in line B, again, even though they waited the same amount. And the only difference was that for the person in line A, you looked at them when they got in the line and said, approximate wait time is 5 minutes from where you're standing. But that made all the difference because setting that expectation gave that person the perception of control. Because think about it, the person in line B, they get in the line, you don't look at them, you don't say anything to them, they are wallowing in ambiguity. They have no idea how long this wait is going to be. They feel completely out of control of their surroundings. And so the whole experience feels unpleasant as a result. But the person in line A, just by setting that expectation, you've now allowed them to start wrapping their heads around this idea of a 5-minute wait. They know what's on the horizon. They know what's coming around the corner. And so they feel greater control. In truth, you've not only given them perceived control, you've given them actual control. Because if they don't like the idea of a 5-minute wait, well, they can just step out of line and come back another time. So at Disney, you see them use this principle because at every attraction at the front entrance, what do they have? They've got a sign that says exactly what the approximate wait time is. And then more recently, they've rolled out those smartphone apps that activate when you're in the park that actually show the time at every attraction. And that actually gives people the power of choice because I can look at my smartphone and not only are my expectations set, but I can actually guide myself through the park to visit attractions that at that moment have a wait time that is palatable to me. And that's why it's a much better experience for the Disney visitor. So, here's how you can go about using perception of control in your business. The first thing is make sure that you are setting expectations with your customers. Think about the analog in your business for standing in line. You might not have a retail store. You might not run a call center, but maybe there's a complicated, convoluted process that you put customers through where they sort of start here at the beginning of the line. Then there's kind of this black box period where they don't know what's going on. And then they spit out the front of the black box. Whatever it is, think about where there may be ambiguity for your customers and just take the time to set expectations. It costs nothing, but it will fundamentally improve the quality of the experience that they have. And then, of course, make sure you keep them informed because I could tell you it's a 5-minute wait from where you're standing, but if suddenly that changes, well, I'm setting up the experience for failure unless I come back to you and keep you informed. So set expectations, keep customers informed. Second, give customers options, but not too many. If you give them too many, it violates another one of the principles, which is about keeping things simple. But in the example of choosing an arm for blood donation, giving people a choice of a time for an appointment, for example, small things. If people exert any kind of choice in the experience, they're going to feel in greater control and they're going to feel better about the experience. And then lastly, this is a very nuts and bolts example, but be specific in conveying timeframes to people, be it your customers, your employees, your colleagues. If you say, oh, I'll get back to you on that shortly, or I'll get you that report soon. Shortly and soon mean very different things to different people. If you use words like that, you in essence are putting that customer or that colleague into a line and they have no idea how long the duration is. So there is ambiguity and therefore the experience feels less good to them. Instead, be specific with your time frame. Say, I will get you an answer to that by Tuesday at 5 p.m. That sounds simple, but it makes a world of difference. All right, so just a time check here. We're nearing our Q&A session. I want to wrap up with some final thoughts. I was able to go through 2 of the 12 principles. I want you to know that All 12 are described in my new book, and here's information for you about it. We are going to send you this email that'll have a brief synopsis of each of the 12 principles so you understand what they all involve. If you are interested in learning more about the book or even ordering a copy, the official website is www.impressedtoobsessed.com. That's impressed, the number 2, obsessed.com. There you can learn about the book. You can order it from any retailer, your favorite retailer, big box or independent bookstore. Also from that website, you can jump off to that to visit my company's website, Watermark Consulting, or my speaker website, jonpicoult.com. And you can also sign up for my monthly e-newsletter if you're interested in getting this kind of content pushed to you on a regular basis. So before we open it up to Q&A, the last thing I just want to leave you with is this. Folks, leave it to your competitors to satisfy customers. Make it your job instead to impress them, to deliver an end-to-end customer experience that is so exceptional, so enchanting, so memorable that customers can't wait to do business with you again, as well as tell others about it. Because the lesson, folks, from legendary companies is clear. If you obsess over your customer experience, then customers will obsess over you. So I thank you all, and I would be happy to take questions.
I love that. Thank you so much, John. Amazing presentation. Before we get started into Q&A, we're going to just launch a quick poll that helps us understand what kind of programming that you, our entrepreneurs, are looking to learn in the future. So let us know. And as you're going into this poll, think about the questions you want to ask John about this. So drop those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We hope to get to them all. We've got plenty of time, so we'll get to as many as we can. So I'm just going to let this run a little bit. Looks like finances at the top. All right. Well, I'm going to end that poll, share those results just so you all can see where your struggles are. Looks like it's a pretty good mix: finance, marketing, and scale. So hopefully we will host some events around that in the coming month. So John, I'm going to jump right into Q&A here. When you started on your presentation, somebody asked, how do we simply measure the customer experience from just the beginning?
So I'll interpret that as meaning, how do you measure the quality of the customer experience? There are a number of ways to do it. The one thing, though, the one guiding principle that I would encourage you to focus on is to make sure that however you're measuring, that you're not just relying on internal measures. There are all kinds of internal measures that can be indirect indicators of the quality of the customer experience you're providing, but they're not the horse's mouth. And there are lots of instances through history of companies that looked at internal gauges, thought they were doing great, and then they actually went out and asked customers, and suddenly they realized, oh my gosh, we've been doing it wrong the whole time. So I'm a big proponent of making sure you've got a robust voice of the customer program where you are periodically going out to the horse's mouth, to customers, in order to get their perspective on the quality of the experience. Now, there are a number of ways you can do that. Many of you may have heard of Net Promoter Score, which is used by 2/3 of the Fortune 1000, I think, actually. It's a simple question that you've probably received as a consumer, the idea of how likely is it that you would recommend a company or a product to a friend or family member. Net Promoter, I think, is a good indicator because it really gets not to satisfaction, but to loyalty. But there are other types of measures too. The important thing is you want to make sure that you are periodically going out and touching base with customers and giving them the chance to provide feedback. I don't want to suggest that surveys is the only way to do it because that's quantitative. And I think you want to make sure you complement things with qualitative data as well. So it's also very helpful, I find, to go out into the wild and actually observe your customers in their natural habitat. Talk, have in-depth conversations with them, to watch them as they are interacting with your business, maybe watch them as they're using your products, perhaps even bastardizing your products to get it to do something it wasn't designed to do. Those are all other ways that you can start to gauge the degree to which the experience that you're delivering either is or is not resonating with your target market.
I love that. And so these principles, you mentioned a lot about the customer side, but what's the applicability to employees? Can you touch briefly on that?
Yeah, so the thing I love about these 12 principles, as I said up front, I use the term customer broadly, and that's why the book talks about creating lifelong fans out of customers and employees. These principles can really be applied to any type of constituency that you serve, whether that's actually a traditional customer, like a consumer or an institution, but it could also be a colleague that just sits a few steps away from you. Or it could be people on your team, members of your staff. Because if you think of the things that help to cultivate loyalty and engagement between a company and a customer, they're actually not all that different than the things that help cultivate loyalty and engagement between an employer or a leader and an employee. It's things like, are you responsive to me? Do you communicate clearly and genuinely to me? Do you advocate for my interests? Do I feel better after I have interacted with you as compared to before? And so all of these techniques that are described in the book can be applied to the employee audience in an effort to turn your own employees into engaged brand ambassadors and lifelong loyalists, not only to you, but to the whole organization.
Awesome. So along that similar thread on feedback loops, I've got a question here. How do we get the info from customers and or employees without asking them to take too much time to analyze their experience?
Was the question, how do we ask them through surveys without having them take too much time?
Yes, word for word, it says, how do we get the info from customers without asking them to take the time to analyze their experience? And
Okay,
I think what my interpretation is, like, how do you ask people for time?
Right. So here's one thing. This is kind of the flywheel effect. If you are doing good by your customers, they actually start to feel a sense of ownership in your business. They become vested in your success. So the better experience that you're delivering, the more likely that customers will actually give you their time, and you have to be sensitive to their time. Absolutely. You don't want to waste it. But once they're vested in you, that makes it a lot easier for you to get feedback from them. Now, if you're just starting out and you have no reputation at all, what I would tell you really is the key is if you are going to create an instrument like a Net Promoter Survey or something like that to gauge your customer sentiment, you want to make sure that it is short and sweet. Actually, you can do a Net Promoter Survey in 2 questions. So it takes less than a minute, for anyone to complete, unless they write a book, in the narrative response. But that can tell you a lot. It can start to give you real directional indicators of what are some of the pain points, what are some of the good points in the experience. And then the other thing too, I would say is whenever you do start asking for feedback from your customers, make sure that you go back to them, thank them, and tell them what you learned and what you're going to start doing differently. Because the worst way to get customers to engage in providing you feedback is to ask them and then never go back and tell them what you did with their feedback. Because that sends a signal to them that, that business really doesn't care about what I think. So if you're going to go through the trouble of asking people, or whether it's a survey or just a quick interview with them, you want to make sure that you go back, tell them, hey, thanks for taking the time, appreciate your feedback. Here's what I learned. Here's what we're going to start doing differently to address any concerns that you raised.
That's great advice. We got another question here on how do we win back detractors?
How do you win back detractors? So, detractors, and for those of you unfamiliar with the term, in Net Promoter parlance, detractors are people that are pretty much dissatisfied or brand haters, if you will. And the way that I think it depends on the nature of your business and how frequent the interactions are with your customers. But assuming that it's not maybe a high frequency interaction business, there's nothing wrong with going out to detractors periodically and messaging them, communicating them, keeping them updated maybe on new developments in your business, new products or services, new features that perhaps might address some of the pain points that they had experienced. It's very important not to write off detractors. The other thing I would tell you is if you're in a high frequency business and you know that somebody is a detractor, you want to make sure to marry that knowledge with operational data. So what was it about the experience that made them a detractor? Did something go terribly wrong? Did they try to order a product and there was a delay? Was some model they wanted not available? Did we waste their time in an interview, in a meeting or something? Whatever it is, if you can undertake what they told you, that what made them a detractor, and then make sure the next time they interact with you, you are bending over backwards. You're in essence overcorrecting to make sure they experience nothing like that in terms of a problem. That's a way to start shifting the tide of perception. So Ritz-Carlton hotels, for example, if you have a problem at a Ritz-Carlton hotel, maybe the tennis court reservation you made wasn't honored or something, they make a note of that in their systems. And then the next time you stay at that or any other Ritz-Carlton, they're going to see that, and they're going to make sure that if you try to make a tennis reservation, you are absolutely going to get it. They're not going to fail twice.
It's great advice. I'm not staying at the Ritz anytime soon, but it's good to know.
I actually, Colin, since finance was something that came up in the poll as being a challenge, if I may, I'd like to say something with regards to that. Because, one thing that many people think is that a great customer experience costs more to deliver. And I hope you got this inkling in my remarks, but I want to be clear that in many ways, a great customer experience can actually cost less to deliver. So if you're saying, gee, I'm strapped from a financial standpoint, how do I invest in this? If you just think about all of the dumb avoidable reasons why customers might contact you right now today, because something upstream didn't work right. Maybe the instructions they got weren't clear. There was a promise made in the sales process that wasn't honored. Whatever it is, things that happen upstream that then create downstream contacts that drive cost in your business. My point is, if you correct the upstream activities, you're in essence eliminating unnecessary, avoidable, I'll even call them dumb reasons why customers reach out and take up the time of you and your team. And that costs money for your business and takes away from customers who really need your help. So that's just one remark I want to make about the finance point, is that if you deliver a great, effortless customer experience that obviates the need for people to reach out to you for unnecessary reasons, that's a way to deliver a better experience at a lower cost.
That's great advice. Another question here. Do you think a startup should hire someone to focus on customer experience or outsource this?
Well, when you use the term customer experience there, if you're referring to the people who are actually providing service to your customers, I would be wary about outsourcing, just because if you want to make this a strategic advantage for yourself, usually companies do not outsource elements of their business that they view as a potential strategic advantage. If you're talking about customer experience in terms of somebody to help rally your organization and focus them on this area, I think that is definitely a worthwhile idea. What you want to be careful about is if you hire somebody to help nudge the organization in that way, you don't want to abdicate that responsibility from yourself as the leader of the business. You want to make sure that people don't think, oh, John's the head of customer experience over there, so I don't need to worry about that. He does all that. Because everybody needs to understand that they have ownership and accountability, and they contribute to that end customer experience. And you, as the leader of your business, you need to make sure that you're setting the example for others. And if anybody gets a sense that you somehow have delegated this and washed your hands of it, that would be bad.
That's great advice. Another question here. Keep them coming. We've got a couple more minutes, folks. How do you identify a tentpole peak for a new marketing channel?
For a new marketing channel. So I think the best way to start of thinking what's an appropriate tentpole is to immerse yourself in the target market that you're going after. So I talked about going out into the wild and observing customers in their natural habitat. Well, you can do that even before you start your business. You could observe prospects in their natural habitat. You could have in-depth conversations with them if they're willing. What you can do through that exercise is start to get a sense, what is most important to people for the type of product or service that you're considering offering to them. And when you start to get this inkling of the things that are sort of the so-called moments of truth for them, the stuff that, they'll tell you, hey, you could do everything right, but if you fail over here at this interaction point, that's it, I'm gone. I'm a detractor and I'm never coming back. So you want to try to get a sense by talking with customers and observing them, what are those moments of truth? Those might be good candidates for creating that tentpole because it aligns certainly with the customer's interests. But I would tell you that the way the tentpole effect works even if you didn't have a good sense of what are those moments of truth for your customer, if you just pick something in the experience and just do it really, really well, it is still going to help you, and it's still going to give you that tide that lifts all boats. Might not be as impactful as if you match it up with a moment of truth, but it still will be helpful.
Awesome. And one final question, and we're almost at time, but really loving all of this. So pre-submitted question came in that says, what are some strategies for engaging customers from the past? So not necessarily a detractor, but somebody you haven't talked to in a while.
Yeah, and my answer here would actually be quite similar, and it gets down to communication. It's funny, but one part of the customer experience, I talked about the spectrum of touch points. Well, one part of the customer experience is actually when customers never hear from you, because the absence of any communication, the absence of a signal might imply from them that you don't care about them anymore. So I think that for customers that you just never heard of for a long time, looking for opportunities to break that radio silence and to communicate with them about some meaningful or relevant topic. Again, it might be a new product or service that could be relevant, a change, a feature, a different thing that you're doing in your business. I'll tell you that in my business, when COVID pandemic hit and lockdowns occurred, I reached out to clients that I hadn't spoken to in years, just simply to reach out and say, hey, how are you doing? And is there any free advice that I can offer you, during what's a very difficult time in fostering customer engagement? So that would be my answer on how to go back and don't be shy about re-engaging people on terms that are going to be meaningful to them.
Great. And Jon, I'm loving all of this, and I can't wait to see the book on the shelves. One key takeaway from anybody on this call and in the internet ecosystem who want to learn more about your book, From Impressed to Obsessed.
Yeah, I would simply tell you this. Remember that with every customer interaction, your business wins or loses share. With every interaction, you win or lose share. And I'm talking about mind share, followed by wallet share, followed by market share. At every touch point, you've got an opportunity to either strengthen customer loyalty or erode it. And great companies, loyalty leaders, they recognize that opportunity and they capitalize on it. They capitalize on it by actively managing the end-to-end customer experience. They capitalize on it by seeking not just to satisfy customers, but to impress them. And so if you want to become a beloved business that everyone wants to work with, that is your ticket for getting there.
I love that. Well, Jon, thank you so much for joining us today. And for everyone in attendance, thank you. Hopefully you learned a bunch. We really appreciate your insights and your time, Jon, and again forward to seeing the book. So on behalf of everyone at the center, thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all online soon.